Well, hello there. Happy Friday. Hopefully, I'm visible and audible and all that good stuff. Before we get into things, I've got some, I don't know, channel programming notes, some miscellany to cover. First of all, I saw that the Critical Role folks have come out with their, I guess, first independent RPG product, the system, right? I know they have Exandria and some other things. I put a vote, I put a poll up in the channel, on the YouTube channel, to see if folks were interested in streaming it. And it seems like pretty overwhelmingly as of when I last checked it. I can't imagine, I can give it a little look, but I can't imagine it's changed too much because it was, 85%, I think, in favor, which is cool because I'm interested in checking it out. What is the tally right now? Hold on a second. Tally, channel, community tab. Let's see. We've got 86% for, 14% against. Hey, Broughton. Good morning. I'm streaming a little bit earlier today because if you're in the United States and hopefully your job permits it, we have Memorial Day on Monday. So trying to kind of get away for the weekend. There will not be a stream on Monday. So probably if I read through the Critical Role book, that would probably be on Thursday, since now I've got some days tagged out. If Tuesday is for toolkit stuff, Wednesday is for solo, that leaves Thursday for, since I'm missing out on Monday and Thursday end up being sort of my open days. So that would be on Thursday. I'm kind of interested to check it out. I think number one, just to see what they're doing. Number two, from what I saw on Reddit, and then someone also commented on the poll, it's based on Blades in the Dark. So it's a powered by the Apocalypse based engine, or I guess Blade. So I guess Powered the Apocalypse, Blades in the Dark was originally a Powered by the Apocalypse engine game. And then it's become popular enough and become its own ecosystem, which I believe it has its own sort of engine or sub-engine called, I think it's called Forged in the Dark. And I think that this is now building on top of Forged in the Dark. And again, apologies if my information is incorrect, but on Reddit, I read that some of the folks behind Blades in the Dark also had something to do with this game. So it's got some lineage from there. I think it has to do with occult investigations. We'll get into it next week when we look at it. Seems to be pretty interesting. The YouTubers, I should say, are fond of throwing around kind of hyperbole. And earlier on, or when I guess this stuff was sort of announced and in development, it seemed like there was a lot of doom and gloom. Like, oh, they're leaving D&D, and this is where they're going. Not to say that that's not true, but this doesn't, to me, seem to be this is where they're going, at least not full time. This, I believe, from what I understand, isn't a fantasy game. It's more in the Call of Cthulhu vein, and they did a short run little series in Call of Cthulhu. So I don't know what this portends for their fantasy gaming. If they're gonna have a fantasy version, because I think they said something similar to like when we read Kobold Press. They're gonna have sort of an engine, and then their kind of game built on their own engine, and this is in that same mix. So I'm not sure how it's gonna work out. It's gonna be interesting, but I don't think that this is, at least yet, to me, like, oh, they're leaving D&D to go here. I mean, unless they're gonna give up on the whole fantasy thing, I think this is something else, which is cool. I'm sure maybe they want to test their waters and stuff, and then maybe build up to doing some kind of fantasy version of these core rules. I guess we'll see. But that'll be next week, most likely on Thursday. The other thing I wanted to discuss, and I was pondering doing this as a separate video, and I might cut this out so that folks who don't partake in the streams, which I understand the streams, they're an hour long, and there are folks out there who I think who just don't have the time, don't want to skip through, and I've been terrible about going back, and when I remember, I'll try to kind of put those table of contents type things where you can skip chapters. But putting in chapters, it's not long, but it takes time that I often don't seem to have, or I don't prioritize it. So I get it if folks decide like, oh, I'm not going to sit through a whole hour for maybe the 5 or 10 minutes that pertain to me. Going back to Critical, Broughton asks, aren't they doing like 2 or 3 things? Isn't Daggerheart their fantasy tabletop RPG? I'm not sure, Broughton. I don't follow Critical Role very much. So it could very well be that they've already announced the name of this one. This Quick Start Rules that's out, which I guess I don't know if it's Kickstarted yet, or they have Kickstarted, is what is it? Candela Obscura Candela, something like that, which is they're occult investigators. So if they already have a Daggerheart is the name, I guess that's coming. I'm not sure where that is, but what's out right now or out in quick start form is this, I feel like Call of Cthulhu-ish kind of game. Okay, so Daggerheart's going to be their fantasy campaign. Okay, so that might be where the doom and gloom's coming in. But this one, it's interesting. I guess this one's coming first. I'm not sure what that says. So getting back to what I was saying before. So I might, if you see this part starting now, snipped out separately, it's because I feel like it's an important enough issue that I'd like folks to see it who don't attend these streams. So where this comes from is I actually was going to write about this or talk about this a while ago, more when Shadow Dark Kickstarter was sort of at its most fervorous, I guess. But I was watching a YouTube, they do board game related material, and they'll put out these kind of updates where they, and maybe I should do these too, where they kind of talk about, hey, what's just going on with the channel. It's not about a particular game. It's kind of what's up with us, where are we going, what are we doing, what are our plans, State of the Union type stuff. And they were talking about something that I guess has come up in the board gaming side of things, which is that, and they didn't get to it. They kind of talked about it implicitly. They didn't say explicitly what it was. So I had to read between the lines a little bit. But it seems to be that something happened, and you could probably Google and find out more information than probably I have, that I guess there's something was coming up with what's happening on Kickstarter with board games and content creators who are essentially paying or are being paid for content about Kickstarters. You've probably seen it, the 10 out of 10, the best thing ever, whatever. And what's not maybe being publicized at all or is in the super fine print is that whether they believe this or not, the fact is they're being paid to put out these purported, reviews. And I'm going to put reviews in quotes because I feel like if you're being paid by the person who created the game to talk about the game, it's hard for me to think of that as really a review. But there it is. I mean, happens, and this is something that I think video games have struggled for with a long time, because how do video game magazines, I should say, when we had a lot of video game magazines, but even now in the age of digital video game magazines, a lot of the access is controlled by the publishers. You get in there, so then what happens when those publishers say, hey, we gave you all this early access to our games, all this stuff, and now you're giving us a 4 out of 10? It's a struggle. And I know there were some scandals that came out about reviews being skewed or people feeling that they were being skewed because of these relationships with publishers that these publications were trying to balance. And I think that some of this may be coming home to roost for board games. Now, these folks I was watching were making a point of saying, look, this is not something we do. We try to be very transparent about what's sponsored, what's not sponsored, all that works. But there's a lot of gray area. Now, Shadow Dark brought this up for me. And I'm not saying that, and I'm not trying to throw shade on Shadow Dark. I don't have anything bad to say about Shadow Dark. I read through the quick start rules. You can find that earlier on. I think that the quick start rules were, detailed and expansive, and I'm assuming give a good look at the game. But definitely in the conversations about Shadow Dark, there was a lot about, hey, these big YouTubers came out and they were all giving the kind of 10 out of 10 best thing ever to Shadow Dark. And there were folks in Reddit who were kind of wary of this stuff, and probably rightfully so, at what felt like marketing kind of blitz, that this was not an authentic, organic reaction, but was part of some kind of marketing push. And I don't know if that's the case at all. I don't think it is, but I have no insider information. But I think it was clear when you read through the comments in Reddit that there was a lot of, well, she's friends with these guys, and so okay, that makes sense. But whether you're friends or not friends with the folks, that's kind of part of your bias. If Daniel from Bandits Keep, who I consider myself friends with, comes out with a product and I start talking about how glowing it is, I probably should mention at some point up front, hey, I'm friends with Bandits Keep. And I would hope that maybe I would say to Daniel, or hopefully Daniel would say, hey, I'd like to put this, if he was kickstarting it or whatever, and he would say, Todd, I'd love to have you put this video up. And I would say, great, but I just want to be upfront, or can we be upfront that this connection that we have is made plain. That's not the same as someone coming out in Reddit saying, boy, Todd and Daniel seem to be all over this thing. And then someone in the Reddit comment saying, well, if you watch his channel and Daniel's channel, they interact a lot and they're friends. So doesn't that make sense? It might, but if you're just going to the Kickstarter, you don't see any of that. And if nobody tells you that either it's paid for literally, or it's kind of friendship karma being scattered around, then you might get an impression that maybe is a little bit. And again, I'm not, and I'm using Shadow Dark as an example just because it's come up and it's big, but I really don't feel like they're doing any of this, and it's really just the way business is done right now. So I don't blame them for doing what everyone else is. Where hey, get some folks say glowing things, throw it on your Kickstarter, and maybe don't worry so much about what the genesis is. And I'm not even trying to say that Shadow Dark isn't awesome and all that stuff, but it definitely raised some flags. I feel like Shadow Dark is maybe the little bit of ice you see in the ocean that's telling you beware the iceberg that may be coming. Shadow Dark isn't the problem necessarily, but it might be the next one where they go and some folks spread some money around, and some creators get them to say 10 out of 10 on the Kickstarter, and they play more shadily with it, maybe because Shadow Dark did well. Well, you might be asking yourself, well, what does this all have to do with you, Todd? You didn't have anything to do with Shadow Dark. No, I don't. But I think it's maybe it's times like this that make me think to reiterate me and kind of how I do things, the channel and whatnot. Now, no one's ever come up to me and asked me to do content for hire on their behalf, at least not with money, which I think is an important distinction, because as someone could rightfully point out, I've gotten stuff from Free League. I've showed off stuff that Free League has been kind enough to send to me. Folks will give me digital and sometimes print copies of their games, which is a form of transaction, even though I'm not getting money in hand. I do try to tick the promotional box everywhere. Anytime I feel like it could be applicable, I've probably missed some, just because it's not always. I have to remember to go find that tick box and that check box and check it. But that's something that happens. No one's ever, paid me any money. And I think the way that I do my streams is, I suppose it's always possible I could cheat and look at stuff and try to gussy it up to be amazing, but I pretty much open it up and deliberately not look at it until I get on stream and then read it out there. Now, in terms of myself, there are pretty much three different sorts of content I do on the channel, right? There's the stuff we do as a community. There's my kind of, I don't know, thought stuff, whether it's tips and tricks that I feel like are good, or stuff that I've come up with. So there's kind of like community. When we do sort of community stuff, there's sort of my kind of thought, blog, vlog, thought leadership, whatever you want to call it. And that's what we call it, like corporate world. They always have thought leadership when folks are writing blog articles, whatever, that kind of stuff. And then there's, the reading reviews, right? Where we take a text, and usually, almost always, it's on stream. Back in the day, I recorded. Earlier on, I would record some of these. Now I tend to do them on stream. Either way, that sort of thing, right? So obviously, community stuff, other than patrons, like you folks, in terms of folks who have contributed as channel members and patrons, you folk are really the force behind that. Me is just me. And then this third one, again, like to the extent that I am, what's the word for it, compensated, it's usually in the forms of material. Now, that material tends to come from a couple different sources. I buy a lot of stuff, and again, thanks to folks who use the drive-through RPG links and who contribute through Patreon and other things that give me the money to buy stuff. That's probably the biggest category of material. The second biggest category would be stuff that I see out in the world, and I will reach out to an author or a publisher and say, hey, I'd love to cover the channel. Would you mind sending me a review copy if you have it? And I don't know, 4 out of 6 times, something like that. I think it's pretty good. People have been fairly nice about that. Will send it to me. And then by far the smallest one is when people are actually reaching out to me and asking me to, hey, could you look at this on the channel? Some of them are folks who were you in the community who have their own little project and will reach out to me and say, hey, I'm in the chat, I'm in the channel, and we may have spoke on stream before, and I have this thing I'm working on. Would you look at it? Great. Now, I've never asked anybody I've never come back to somebody and say, well, I'd like to cover it, but can you hand me a 50? I'd love to get to a point where I'm big enough where I could justify charging folks for that. Of course, that would change the dynamics. That would be upfront with you. But right now, that's it. So the only compensation is like, yes, send it to me. No, not. And I'm pretty picky. And when I look at it, if someone were to come through and go through all my reviews and see that, man, he likes 99.99% of the things, and I don't think there's anything that I flat out looked at and said, nope, I really just don't like this. It's because it's the stuff that I bought. It's the stuff that I've asked for. So I'm pretty, I'm not just going to get anything. I'm not going to drive through and hitting a roulette sort of wheel and say, find me a random thing that I may or may hate. I'm usually looking out for the stuff that I like. So I'm predisposed to cover the things and talk about the things that I have liked or I think I will like, and not just stuff that is awful. So I think that's pretty clear. And of course, yeah, I try to, I always forget to say it and I always forget to put in the videos, but it's probably part of the nature of the streams. I get something, I don't look at it. The stream opens. Literally the first time I usually look at these PDFs beyond maybe the cover, because if I try to work the cover in to make some thumbnail or something, I usually will look at the cover and maybe I'll look at the front matter or something like that. I usually just stream starts, pulling open the PDF for pretty much the first time and then go through it. So not only do I not give folks any idea of what I'm going to talk about before I do it, I don't have any idea of what I'm going to talk about before I do it, which I hope comes through in terms of being organic and all that stuff. But no one gets any say in what I'm doing, because it's essentially, especially now that they're on stream 99% of the time, it's on stream. So whatever comes out comes out. And I've only had one person kind of get mad, and I felt bad, but at the same time, they did have a lot of there was just stuff in there that needed fixing. And when you send something out, I think they felt like their response was, hey, I'm a small creator, and I felt like you didn't really like you should be propping me up as kind of a small creator, and it felt like I didn't. But I think, and I felt bad. I didn't get an argument, but my counterpoint is that you're putting something out for publication, you're giving it to me to look at, and I do this in a very organic way on stream. I can't help it if I see a typo and I'm reading it out loud, I'm going to stumble over the typo. It's just, what else am I supposed to do? And I'm going to talk about it honestly. So edit it, pay for an editor. Like, these are things you do when you're putting out a product. And if the product comes out and there are shortcomings, you kind of got to roll with it and try to grow with it, and not, I think, blame me for not protecting you as a small creator. The last thing I want to say on this is I have had some folks come out with Kickstarters and want me to not promo in the sense of make their Kickstarter in the description video, but kind of like, hey, I've got this Kickstarter running. Will you post about it on social media, or will you talk about it? Will you do something? Will you share it with your community? And so far, I haven't really done it, except for a couple of, I think, exceptions, mostly like the stuff with, like I just did Cobalt Press and we did Shadow Dark, when they have material. And that's kind of the deal. If you're a creator, and I know there's a bunch of creators who, if they don't subscribe, watch, because more often than, I'm always shocked that as often as what happens is I'll reach out to somebody for a review copy and I'll get back, oh, hey, love the channel, love your videos, all that stuff, which is flattering to me. So I know that folks are out there are watching, even if maybe don't show up in chat, or they are, actively being involved. If you have a Kickstarter that you have, I'm happy to support creators, especially small creators who are trying to fund their products, but don't send it to me with essentially like a photo, a PR release, and a prayer. Okay, I'm not interested in that. If you have quick start rules, if you have something that I can look at, even if I can't share it all, if you say, hey, this is our rules, but it's in serious beta and we're not ready for it to get out there, but we'd like you to see it. Expecting me, even though I don't have a big channel by YouTube, look, I'm grateful for everyone who follows or watches or does anything, right? But in the terms of YouTube, I'm tiny, but I'm not going to just be a mouthpiece or just a retweet kind of machine. No, I'm not going to look at it. I'm just retweet it up because you send it to me, especially if it's just like, oh, here's a PR thing. Here's a little, this is some art that we think is going to be inside. And here's a little blurb. It doesn't tell me anything. What am I supposed to do? What am I supposed to do with that? And especially for people who I don't know. Like if Daniel, again, going back to Daniel from Bandits Keep, if Daniel sent me something, say, this is something I'm working on, but all I can share right now is like this one piece of artwork that I've commissioned and this blurb, I might do something with that because I know Daniel. I trust Daniel. I feel like if Daniel sends that to me, until proven otherwise, Daniel's good. I can roll with Daniel with that. I'm going to do that. If you're just someone, I don't have any idea who you are, I don't have any relationship with you, and you send me these little things and it's expecting me just to pass it on to the community, it feels like it feels a little bit like you're just sort of, you're using me, right? That's it. And we all look, everything's transactional. Hey, you send me a digital copy of the book and I'll do a review, which theoretically will increase sales of your book. So everything's kind of transactional, but this is kind of like, hey, I've got this Kickstarter and I'd like you to you to transmit this, that we're trying to get our stretch goals over to your people, and not to be super capitalist. And I don't even mean for me personally, but like, well, what is the part that I'm going to get out of this? So you want me to just funnel my community to you, but you're not giving me anything of substance that I can share with them to let them know this is good, or something that I think they'll like. It's just because. And this all kind of came to a head for recently, when someone reached out to me at a Kickstarter that I was actually really interested in. When they sent it to me, like, hey, this is what we're doing, I was like, this is awesome. It sounds really good. It had to do with a place that I was kind of familiar with, so I was like, oh man, this could be really good. It was for, I think it was for Call of Cthulhu. It wasn't D&D, but still, I was like, man, this looks good. But I asked, like, well, can I have something? Like, is there something I can read, something I can look at? And we went back and forth a little bit, and they got frustrated with me. Frustrated, and I asked them, well, what is there? And like, well, we did some actual plays with some folks a little bit on YouTube, and I was like, oh, can you send me that? Do you have something of that you can send me? And then there was kind of this response was like, that's our core product. As if like, what are you mad? That's our core product. Are you mad? What are you thinking? And like, I should know, like, okay, well, geez, sorry. And that's pretty much where the conversation died. And again, I will say this to content creators: look at a lot of the hugest, biggest Kickstarters and say the OSR space. A lot of that content's already out there, right? A lot of that content is, Into the Odd. They're putting up content in their Patreon. You can become a patron for a month and download all kinds of stuff from Into the Odd, like Old School Essentials. A lot of that stuff is out there, or they're posting updates. Shadow Dark gave out a very large set of quick start rules, which you could probably just grab that and play it and just never look at getting any for paid Shadow Dark materials. That's probably enough, which is amazing. Errant had their whole rules in just a huge website. We went through it. I spent felt like a year going through all the stuff on Errant. If you're afraid that shooting your core rules over to me is going to blow up this Kickstarter in your face, and by the way, they were already funded. They were looking, stretch goals, and I get you're trying to increase your funding, but it's not like they were coming to me and like, well, our Kickstarter is just beginning, and if we hand this bozo our core content, he's gonna, I don't know, what am I gonna do? I'm gonna race to Kinko's. I'm gonna race and type up an alternate Kickstarter. What am I doing with it? If you feel like your core rules, giving it to someone like me to share, either in terms or in part, is gonna just blow your spot, I don't know if you feel confident in your product. I guess, I mean, they've already had actual plays of it, so it's not like the content is totally secret. And it's the one thing you have to share, and you can't share it, then that's great. Run your campaign the way you want, but don't expect me just on a wing and a prayer just start sending out tweets and whatever, and making videos and things about this thing that I know nothing about. Otherwise, or maybe I got to go watch somebody else's actual play to figure it out. It's a bad scene. And I think also somebody had actually reached out to me and said, hey, do I ever cover Kickstarter stuff? And this is kind of why I think, if we want to boil it down, is because a lot of the Kickstarter stuff for RPGs is not fully baked during the Kickstarter. Whereas I feel like with board games, at least, there are prototypes, things that may change, but prototypes will go out there and you can do it. As far as I've seen, I've not really seen much. I mean, there are big exceptions to this, like Shadow Dark, like Old School Essentials, that essentially have prototype or beta material out there you can look at. But for a lot of these other ones, they don't. And so far, I have had zero success when I've reached out to somebody with a Kickstarter of like, hey, I'd love to talk about it, but I'd love to see some of it first. I've shared it with you. So if you wonder why I don't do a lot of Kickstarter, that's why. So I hope, I think I maybe gone around a little bit of circles, but ultimately I just wanted to circle back to just giving sort of the update on how the stuff works with me. I'm not fortunate enough to be paid by anybody. If anything, I get paid in or compensated in product. And even then, that's the minority of things that I cover. Usually it's stuff that through the folks in the community, through ads on YouTube, through channel members, through patrons allowed, and through the drive-through links, affiliate links, give me a little bit of fun money to go and buy some stuff with, other than I'm just buying it myself. And then for the stuff that is given to me, most of that is actually stuff that I ask for. It's not publisher driven, it's driven by me. And then for the few things that are publisher driven, I'm sure that some bias creeps in. Like, I love Free League's stuff. I think they do an amazing job. I think I felt that way before I was ever gifted anything of theirs, and I'm always super upfront about, hey, they gave this to me, It's not something that I purchase with my own coin. But I think ultimately when the stream runs and I'm reading through it, and that stuff isn't in my forefront. But I thought I just wanted to reiterate it. Nobody's asked about it. Nobody's come after me for anything. But I thought, I called that my little State of the Union for the spring. And they made a little bit of rant on maybe the state of Kickstarters and these things. I feel like there's going to be one that's going to come do a lot of money and then crash and burn around some folks who were paid to do stuff, to say things, and maybe don't come completely clean about the fact that they're compensated. I feel like it's going to happen. If it's happening in the board game space, and it sounds like something like that is, don't be surprised if it comes, because I'm sure if it hasn't happened already and just hasn't gotten caught yet, it will. But, I'm not there yet. I'll feel like there's a milestone when somebody comes to me and wants to pay for me to make some kind of Kickstarter video. And I would do it, but I would make sure that I've told everybody, hey, this is a promo. They've asked me to do this, and here are my thoughts. Take it as you were. But I'm not there yet. Someday. And with that, I will take a sip of, what is this? Blood orange tangerine spinger for the working man. And I've been concentrating on trying to get this out, so I haven't been looking at the chat. So let me go back and see what's happening on the chat front. Let's see. Oh, there's a lot here. Okay, we saw Daggerfall. Yep, Brian Smith starting at 12 today. It's mostly to get away, so I can maybe get away early. I'm gonna try to get out early. Brian Smith also says big companies do love to act like they control influencers. They want their audience, and they try to force them in line. Yeah, that's probably true. Broughton says I feel like it got more attention despite being a lot like the whole slew of other old school meets new school material out there. This is talking about Shadow Dark. Yeah, and that's why I always think about it, because it did get a lot of focus. And I think that, again, from what I've read, only the quick start stuff, I have no inside tracks. It seems really good. But when you get a lot of prominent YouTubers with large audiences who are all saying like 10 out of 10, it kind of got people a little bit, looking at it askew, which is good. I think kind of some healthy skepticism is good. Now, in Shadow Dark's case, it seems like it's all going to be what everybody thinks it's going to be, which is great. But there probably is going to be one that comes afterwards that's going to have a similar thing that may be slightly less, right? But I can see where there might be a bit of a slippery slope here, and it also seems like board games have slid down the slope ahead of us. So it behooves us a bit to maybe just be aware of these things, so you don't end up, suffering in the great OSR tulip, burst of 2024. Let's see. Brian Smith says, I think companies that have experience with quote unquote journalistic integrity disclose their biases. Unbiased reporting is rare in any sector. That's true. I mean, and one of the things, and it's not even right, because a lot of these folks on Kickstarter, especially in the OSR space, they're not super big, right? So it's all people. I mean, it's always ultimately people making decisions and sometimes putting their ethics and things aside. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge, do it. A lot of folks are just independent creators and small teams, small companies, and it's not always clear what you're supposed to do or what you need to do or what it's right to do. When we look at how other folks are doing their Kickstarters, it's something that's not the norm, I don't think, in Kickstarter to really disclose a lot of this stuff. It's just get the most eye-popping, optimistic kind of videos and intros and things on your channel. Get those pull quotes and things out there and go, and not so much thought into what do we need to say about the context around all this stuff. So I don't really blame people for falling into it as a creator, but you've got to be mindful. And if they're not mindful on their end, it means that us as the consumer, when we're on the consumer end, need to be kind of doubly mindful. And then since I'm kind of floating around, I'm not really in that space, but I'm sort of floating around near that space, I felt like it's something that I could address, because I haven't addressed it in a while. So there are always new folks and folks who haven't seen it. So it's a good thing for me to kind of reiterate sort of where I am in my journey, so to speak. Let's see. Brian Smith is glad I'm not suffering through reviewing things you hate. It sounds like a soulless job. Yeah. Yes. It hasn't come to it yet. I mean, this is one of those things. If somebody sent me something and I was just like, yeah, not, I would probably just say like, sorry, I can't do it. I'm not going to read through it and force a review. I mean, the only thing I might is if it were something that was out there, I'm not averse to like Shadow Dark. Shadow Dark's blowing up, and all right, I'll get a hold of it. I'll read it. Right, I'll read it on stream. We'll do that. And if something else was blowing up, and it just turned out it was something I didn't know I was not going to like, hey, it happened. It happened. It hasn't happened yet, but it might happen. But I'm not going to go chasing stuff I don't like. I'm not trying to do negative reviews. I'd probably get a lot more viewership if I did a bunch of negative reviews where I just hated on stuff. But I don't want to do that. Brian Smith says, I really appreciate the scope of things I feature because they seem to be something I'm personally interested in. I would hate to see everybody reviewing the same 10 things from Kickstarter. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, that's part of it. Like, I don't want to, I could easily go negative routes and it might even be more entertaining. However, I don't want to. And yeah, I want to keep it to stuff that I like. There's enough stuff out there that I like. I don't need to go chasing stuff I don't like. Brian Smith says, has the same vibes of not collaborating on a project because you think somebody will steal it. Nobody has those kinds of world-changing ideas. Truly, The Simpsons have already done it. Yeah, I mean, that's the thing, right? You're afraid to share because you're afraid someone's going to come in and take your idea. All you're doing is limiting yourself. And look, these folks, they're Kickstarter funded. I don't even know. I probably wouldn't have changed the needle much one way or another. No, I just don't have that big of an audience. When you look at, and the interesting thing too is I'm always looking at the forums, trying to get more people to engage with it. And you really feel like there's this kind of inverted sort of pyramid, right? With folks you can get to engage on different levels, and it really shrinks down fast. So you go from me now, I'm about 3,000 and change subscribers. That's just the very surface of the pyramid. But then as you go down and the more engagement from the community, it's like you're saying, well, how about a tenth of that? How about a tenth of that? How about a tenth of that? So when you get down to that bottom, to folks who may actually act on stuff, it's like a tenth of a tenth of a tenth. So you get down to like, oh, okay, maybe I can count on like 12 people clicking on the link to go to the Kickstarter, because after out of all the people, I mean, just the amount of people who are subscribers who I'm not even sure how many videos they watch, down to the people who are actually watching, it's a small number. So, one way or another, I would not have moved the needle so much. So I don't blame them for not like, oh, well, Todd asked for it, so we better give it to him. No, but just in terms of philosophy, I would hope that you would want somebody who wants to really engage with your product before just blabbing about it. But, people just reach out, especially now that I've gone to PAX a couple times. I'm on the lists. So I get like press releases and I'll get stuff. And oftentimes like, okay, this is nice, but I'm not just I'm not that channel. I'm not the news channel. I mean, if people want that, let me know. If you want me to have a day every couple of weeks to cover, news around the world of role-playing games, I could do it. I'd probably be terrible at it. I could probably do it, but it's not my jam right now. So I'm not interested in just passing on your news to whomever. Brian Smith says, I need you to signal boost a project I'm embarking on, a sci-fi fantasy golf simulator, 800-page D28 system. I can tell you more than that. You in? Yeah. I mean, but literally, Brian Smith, I get stuff like that. And that was not, if you had attached put that more in maybe given an actual sort of press release or kind of blurb, and then just attached like a random image from a player handout that may or may not end up in the final book. I mean, that's literally kind of what I've gotten on occasion with like, hey, we'd love you to signal boost it. It's like, okay, but why? Like, no offense to you, pal, but why? Like, why am I doing that? Right. And I feel like if I'm going to share it, I need to be able to see it so that I can share it. I mean, because I got to talk about it, because I'm not just a mouthpiece. And that's where I feel like if you just want me to, if that's your goal, right? If you think I'm the kind of person, then you should be paying me for that. Like, why am I giving you access to my community just because you ask for it? Like, that's no way to run a business, pal. Yeah, I don't think I'm going to run any news. A discussion. Yeah, I think that probably would be it. Like, that's what I do now, right? If something comes up in the news or in the, I don't know, in the thing, that I usually have something I want to say about it. And that's the angle, as opposed to just like me with some papers going today in the news and looking at the teleprompter. I think I spent way much longer on this than I wanted to. Oh yeah, but I think it was good. Let's move over, shall we, to the forums. And there I am. I had put out the call, and this was, I don't know if he's in the chat, but I believe this was None Nothing, user friend of the channel. None Nothing had suggested, because I'm always asking folks from the community, because that's one of the things, we're talking about things like random people sending me random things and just saying, please share it with your community just because we're asking you. I'm usually asking the community, hey, send you who are here, who actually we have a relationship, send me stuff if you want to check it out. I mean, it is what it is. And it's not for everyone. And I get it. Not everyone wants to just send stuff off and have somebody like me and other folks kind of dissecting it on the internet, especially if you're not prepped for it. But if it's just work in progress, or it's just a blog post or whatever it is, I think it can be fun. And I think it just enriches all of us. But I did ask for folks to send magic items for last week, and then this week locations. I only got a couple. I meant to put my own up there. Maybe I'll just chat about it. I was kind of having a hard time coming up with one I felt like was a really memorable location, as opposed to this was a neat kind of dungeon or some other thing. But we'll read through some Dungeon Master Masterclass answered the call. And I will read his. I'm just going to read it. So when I start talking and you hear my's and I's, that's me as Dungeon Master Masterclass, not me as me. Okay. Quote, my favorite location in my current hex crawl is an Oxbow Lake, which the locals call the Oxbow Lake. It's 10 miles away from the campaign hub of Brushside, which I named, I as in me. The lake is on one of the natural paths from Brushside to the wilderness where the hex crawl proper happens. I have a one-page document I used during play. Keep in mind it was meant for me to use, not for publication, but I think it's pretty understandable, except, of course, for the game mechanics of my made-up system. Mechanically, all you need to understand is that the main bad guy in the Oxbow Lake is Grundlefin. He wouldn't be a challenge for 4 or 5 low-level adventurers, except that he is underwater, and fighting in or underwater is extremely difficult in my system. The water striders, on the other hand, are only as smart as insects and could be killed easily if the PCs are careful and attack from a distance. But they could also be a major problem if a PC ended up fighting 2 or 3 without support. All my goals for the location came to fruition, which is probably why it's my favorite in this campaign. Here are the high points. The party kept coming back. The way its treasure recovery works, the party was chased off by Grundlefin several times, recovering some money each time. At first, it was a primary adventure site for the whole party, but after the first few trips, it became a location where a PC would go when only 2 people could attend a session. When the party finally went back in full force and defeated Grundlefin, it was still a challenge because of the addition of the zombies, which are tougher than zombies in most RPGs. The party interacted with the location by experimenting with it. At different points, they rented a boat to bring with them to get further into the lake without being in the water. They figured out how to use summon swarm spells to kill all the water strider eggs, decimating their population, and they even constructed a diving bell and tested it before using it in the last encounter. The location, quote-unquote, changed over time. Because the party took so long dealing with the location, 4 other adventurers died in the lake and ended up as zombies in the final encounter, which prevented it from being too easy, even though the PCs were a higher level than they, quote-unquote, should have been. Dealing with the location changed the world. When the demon Grundlefin was finally killed and a few small, nearby goblinoid layers were cleared, the area became safe. Later, when the party walked past the Oxbow Lake, people were building a dock and starting to go out on the lake. Players liked seeing that. And then, so Brian Smith says, I should combine forces with Daniel and form a media channel. Hexed Keep Bandits Press. Yeah, I like that. And then Brian says here in the forums, we played in the Eberron setting for a few years, and I spent so much time thinking about the different locations the players were moving through. Their home base was an orphanage in the lower slums. I had a lot of fun fleshing out. We had about 8 NPC orphans, an automaton metal scraper they rescued who helped out taking care of the kids, along with a retired character who kept in contact with the rest of the adventuring party. They first arrived when the orphanage was under the sway of some dream creatures. They wiped them out and saved the kids, then kept donating money and asking about the place. They entered a race and won for the district, spreading the cleric's religion to some kobolds, returned a lost glove to a kindly widow of the war, and almost got half the kids killed when one of the PC's past caught up with them, of course, at the doors of the Willowwick Academy. That campaign seems unlikely to resume, which seems a shame, but they have a deed to a property a few levels up in the city, which they debated cleaning up and moving the orphanage to a new building. However, of course, they need to clear out the monstrous squatters and traps set by the criminal element that had been using it as a facility to produce narcotics. They've long since fled, but oozes have taken up the dilapidated manor, and most of the traps remain readied. Good times. All right, so these are the 2 I got. I will add mine in a moment, but I thought I feel like the really important thing, the thing that I think links these 2 very different types of locations together. Let me just take a swig here of Spindrift. Is the fact that these locations are not static. As the party is interacting with the location is changing. It might be changing in relation to the rest of the city. It might be that the inhabitants of the location are changing. It might be the nature of the location is changing. As in Dungeon Master Masterclass's example, they're slowly clearing out the lake, and as they're clearing out the lake, that changes the encounters they're getting, and eventually the lake becomes a place that is essentially open to be settled. It's the monsters have been vanquished. And I think that, like you mentioned, players like seeing that. I think that as players, we like seeing these sorts of events or these sorts of evolutions because they demonstrate that our actions as players are having real effects in the world. And that's always something that has been hard or difficult, so I think sometimes for folks, is to allow that change to happen. Like, hey, this is not a dangerous place anymore. It's now safe, and just showing that. And it's one of those things that's kind of a little thing, because it can just be in the background and you might think, oh, I want to just move on to the next thing. But by having the party be able to come back and see it, it's that feeling of, hey, we're making changes. And I think that's also sometimes where in campaigns people rush along too much. It's always just get on to the next thing. But these kinds of, the way these locations evolve is when you're able to revisit them. And it's not, we're in place A, we're going to do stuff in place A, then we're going to go to place B, and we're never going to come back to place A at all. Well, then you never get to see that stuff. But if you allow a place to marinate, if you say, hey, you know what, we're going to come back to place A, there's still stuff going on in place A, then they can really, kind of see that. And that can be, I feel like that's often some of the secret sauce, or it's not even, I don't even know why I call it secret sauce. That kind of ingredient is just revisiting places. Because I think in a lot of campaigns, especially with kind of modern D&D, is you're on this linear course that's just as fast as you can sprint. You go through a dungeon. At the end of the dungeon, you don't even go back out. You just star wipe and you go to the next thing, and you go to the next thing, and you go to the next thing, and just things are moving, but you never get a chance to kind of stop and smell the roses. A lot of this stuff happens when you have these moments where you can kind of just like, oh, relax a minute, or just revisit a place you've already been to, and go like, oh, okay, all right, we did it. Like, you play through Lost Mine of Phandelver, and you're doing all this stuff, and at the end of Lost Mines of Phandelver, you have potentially changed that region. But then oftentimes it's like, well, the party's going to jump off to some other place. Well, then they're never going to see what happened in Phandalin or wherever they were. It just kind of like you don't even know what effect you had. Well, what happened to the red brands, or what happened to the dragon that we made a deal with? What happened to these things? Well, you never see it, so you don't know, and you might just think like, I don't even know what we really did at the end of the day. That whole adventure was just to get us to level 3 and then out of there. Where it's like, no, like come back and see it and fold it in and fold it back in. Have the red brands show up later. Have them looking for you. Have the dragon come back to make good on its bargain when you're in the middle of something else. Like, show that these things, have changed. And it's also where you can get those consequences. In these cases, it's all been pretty much, for the most part, positive consequences, but there are also those negative consequences. And if you want party to feel it, they got to come back and see the aftermath. Oh, you made some deal with the dragon and then you left. Well, look what happened to the town when the dragon has ransacked it or put it under its sway and become a tyrant. This is what you did. Put your nose in it a little bit, really see it, see what you did, kind of thing. Brian says, completely agree. If it's a place the group returns to, they just add layers of story. Yeah. Now, we only got those 2. And I meant to come back and put my own. The one that comes to mind, so I had this place. It was a cool location, but I don't know if the location itself was the thing. So I had this location called Temple of the Bat, and it was located in this woodlands. So the story was, this is in an earlier campaign, the party had gotten this. Their first mission when they came to this was they got a map of the region with, and I've used this example in other things where there were some things put out, markers put on the map, and they were literally like notes, kind of names, but they weren't technical names. They're like, what, a cave of thieves? That was a place they went to. Another one where someone wrote there were sort of structures in the woods, and they put, temples, question mark kind of thing. And it was really just to give the party clues what might be out there, an idea of what they might be, without betraying, or without suggesting that someone has a lot of information. This stuff, like the reason why I used question marks and kind of written like these are like, well, we think, or rumors says there are, is that they weren't going to be able to get perfect information on any of these places, but they'd get enough to get a little bit of a feel out of it. Well, they went to the Cave of Thieves. They had some adventures, misadventures, and they came back. And then they decided to go out and try to find these temples. They ended up meeting these shapeshifters who lived in the woods. They were kind of it was sort of a riff on sort of werefolk, but they were shape they could change into different creatures. And they ended up I forget what ended up happening, but they ended up being tasked with, there was some kind of decay was invading the forest, and it was this kind of find out where this decay is coming from. It's killing the forest and try to stop it. So they kind of track this decay. They had there was a kind of a fun encounter with some ooze that caused some issues. They ended up getting to this location, which was Temple of the Bat. And it was in this field, and there was a little mound, and then there was it's kind of a temple on top where could some stone stairs and kind of an edifice on top, but it was really inside. So the location itself, I thought that it was kind of fun. This sort of I liked playing with the idea of this forest that's just under this supernatural decay, and playing with all the sights and smells and just the kind of rot things going on. I think I had these rot zombies that were in there, which is these things in this rotted state that were coming out of the woodwork, literally, these kind of things. So they get to this epicenter of it, and inside I had this map. I don't really remember to be honest, what I was thinking, but the mound actually had stairs. So you go up these stairs in these kind of double doors. There's a little bit of a chamber, and then there's stairs going down, basically into the earth, into the mound. And it opens up into this, after a long set of stairs, opens up into this kind of cavern where there's this chasm that goes across the middle of the cavern, and there were chambers on either side. And there was stuff going on, and this priesthood who had been there, and there was one guy who was, I think, hiding up in that antechamber, and there was a couple other priests down there, but it was sort of infested with rot. And then there was way at the bottom of this chasm was just this dark water, and I don't remember if I even had really thought of anything with the water. And there was a rope bridge that went across the chasm. Now, what makes this this really works more as a dungeon sort of the Jacazing example than a location, but I thought the location was kind of neat. But that's in terms of location that goes. But what was really, I think, fascinating about as a place was the interaction between these rooms, and then this ledge around the chasm, and then the chasm, because the whole way this thing played out had nothing to do with any ideas that I had about how this thing was going to go. It was all about how they interacted with just this location, this spot. I think I might have just rolled randomly, or I don't know if I picked them out, but I had camel spiders that were living there was like little caves or holes in the sides of this chasm that they were living in. They were kind of down there. And I think what ended up happening was, though the party, they dealt with some things and they were feeling good. I think they were feeling themselves a little bit. And it's always that fun thing in games, especially I feel like in the games where you can really get punished for your missteps. Like they were low levels in the OSR game. You can really get hammered when you start to get that little, like you it too. It's like you let your guard down a little bit, and then that's where something happens. So they were coming across the a rope bridge, right? And I think even one of the ropes might have broken or something happened. I think I had a roll in there where something might have gone wrong. But the magic user with his torch somehow decided, like, oh, I'm just going to cross over here and go check things out, and like put himself at kind of a distance from the party and just walking around. I'm like, wow, you're really, and this is play by post. And I'm reading it. I'm like, okay, that's an interesting choice. Interesting choice there. And it turned out that there was one of these spiders was in like the next room, just like, munching on a body, like just going on a corpse. But got startled when this magic user all by himself just comes walking in with his torch over his head And and that started this whole kind of chaos where they end up accidentally burning the bridge. The magic user gets pulled down. Because one of the other crab spiders came up, and there was a few rounds where it was like, they're trying to grapple the magic user, and he like would escape. I think finally one of the things like got him, and then it starts to go back down. It's like I'm done with this noise. I got my dinner. I'm gonna head back home. So it got the magic user in his pincher claws, and it's like trying to scuttle back down the side of the chasm. And then in what was just an amazing move, the fighter just goes like, I'm leaping off. I'm going to try to leap off I'm going to dive down and try to basically dislodge the magic user with myself, right? I'm going to just slam into this crab spider and try to just take the magic user with me, like, and get out. And it worked. Of course it worked. And then they're both plummeting. So yeah, he had some rolls, makes the rolls, just launches himself like a bullet down there, slams into the crab spider with the magic user, is able to kind of wrench the magic user free. Then they're falling, and they even did the heroic, and I'm going to turn myself so that I'm going to hit the surface of the water first. It's like 80, or I don't know how far down I rolled it ended up being, and then splash down into the water, which was a great heroic moment. But then I was using, I think I was using Mythic, and I kind of started asking questions of Mythic, like, well, what's down there in the water? What might they have? Did they disturb something that was down in those waters? And they did, and it ended up being, and I mentioned this in another, I think I mentioned this maybe it was even last week's stream talking about something else, but this was when the walker, this kind of War of the Worlds style walker, was awoken from them just plummeting down and smashing into the water. The fighter lost their armor, but they were able to kind of get rid of the camel spiders, and they had just enough rope to kind of lower it down, and they're able to get, and the fall damage didn't kill them, but it really knocked them out, or knocked them down. And then as they're climbing up the rope, this walker is coming up behind them, and I try to be with, like, we're playing a fantasy game, even though it's a sci-fi element. I'm playing it's a fantasy game, so I'm trying to describe it in what the terms I feel like they would maybe see it as, with a glowing eye and kind of a carapace and these weird spindly limbs and whatnot. And so the thing's kind of coming online, so to speak, and then rising up sort of as they're clambering up this rope. And then that's where the other guy who had the because I think we were talking about NPCs last week, and I had that NPC. That's where that thing was like, oh, I think this thing would be a perfect vessel for my brain, for my mind, and not the brain of this PC. So that's when he jumped into that, and then they took off, and I'm assuming are still having amazing adventures. So not so much. So, apology that's not super into the location itself, but it was just this idea of the geography of the place, just having possibilities. I never hoped in my wildest dreams that they would end up like that. This crevasse, this thing would be so integral that they would burn the bridge, and I mean, it wasn't even on purpose. It was something to do with, like, one of them almost fell. Oh yeah, like one of them almost fell. They were dangling, and then of course in like a moment of like, oh, I forget what it was. Like either the guy who was dangling was holding the torch in one hand, or someone had to do something with the torch to get the guy, and they end up doing. It's almost comedy of errors where it's like, oh, I got to put the torch down. It's like, oh, you put the torch down on the wooden bridge that's like rotting and weak. Like, oh, okay, well, let's see what happens with that. And then it's like, no. And then the magic user who just got too full of himself and just ended up with his like 5 hit points or something. It was just like, well, I forget what he had. It was just like wandering ahead. I was just thinking like, oh my gosh, I can't believe we're doing that. And it was just, everything just came together. I mean, it was like the best example of setting up this mini little sandbox and having all the elements come into play in a way that I could never have. I mean, if I had imagined that, if I had said like, this is how I think it's going to go, it would have sounded like it's like some kind of Three Stooges choreographed routine. And it wasn't, but it was so amazing. It was sort of funny. It was heroic. It was, scary. And it was just like having these elements there. And then everything just kind of went into place. It was like, oh, like, does the creature thing? Like, yeah, I'm like rolling dice. Like, oh, it does. Like, is it going to try to do this? Oh, yeah, it does. And like everything just kind of came together. So for me, my example, unfortunately, doesn't have any long-term, like, here's how the location evolved and how it showed the dynamism of the world. But I can say that what I would say with this location is how you can have, and if I were to show you a map of the space, and maybe if I can find it, I'll dig it up. It's nothing special. There's nothing, they didn't even make it into most of the things because they ended up having to kind of get out, and they couldn't get out the way they came. But I think they might have even made an argument like maybe there's a back door, and I thought, oh yeah, there probably is, and then I just added one in because I was like, yeah, that makes sense. There's probably some kind of back exit, but that you can put simple things. Nothing was complex. Nothing was by itself something that required anything, but you just putting those pieces on the board, and then you allow stuff to just play with them. So I just had these pieces. Oh, there are crab spiders here. There are people here. There's these elements, and then it's not always going to happen. Like, I think I could probably run that. I could probably run that space 20 times, and maybe 18 out of 20 times nothing funny or interesting or amazing happens. They just run it. They're wary of the side, this kind of crevasse in the middle. They're cautious. I mean, certainly that's how I would be, cautious, right? Okay, well, if we're going to cross this bridge, it's wood, it's rope, it's clearly it's in a situation where it's going to be something we may only get to cross once. So let's make sure to do all our business on one side, make sure we need to cross and want to cross before we go back to the other side. Like, if you played it out super thoughtfully, it would have been maybe even not interesting. It would have been like, okay. But when you have all those pieces there's those times where it's just going to be like, yep, all of a sudden things are just going to pinball out of control. And soon the tilt buttons are coming up and you're laughing and you're going like, I can't believe all this stuff happened. I can't believe this guy jumped down from the top of this thing like a cliff diver and just launched themselves into this giant crab spider, grabbed the magic user, rotated their bodies so that they would hit the water. Then they're sinking like a stone because they're wearing plate armor. Then they're able to ditch their plate armor and swim to the surface. And they're all these things are happening. Like, these are the moments, like, oh my, and I could never have planned for them. But you can't have those moments if you don't allow space for them. And I guess you're trying to create this space. It's kind of like you're putting together a playground. You don't know how the kids are all going to interact with this stuff, but then when you watch kids, they interact with it in ways that I think the designers never think that they're going to. Oh, the kids are going to climb on top of the thing, and they're going to get underneath the ladder and try to crab walk up backwards. They're going to do all this weird stuff, but the place doesn't stop you. So they're able to do all that and come up with all kinds of fun stuff. And then they can use the playground conventionally, but it's everything's there to be unconventional. The makers don't put spikes underneath so that the kids can't get under, right? They don't try to block access to all the different things. They're just like, yeah, if you want to climb to the top of the swings and hang upside down from the bar and then do these other things, or hey, hopefully your parents are all right with it, go for it. And I kind of feel like that's sort of a design ethos for spaces that I appreciate, if that makes sense. Now the chat's gone awfully quiet. Hopefully folks are still here. We did make it to an hour. So this ended up being really good. So hopefully that my whole thing at the beginning was worthwhile. And like I said, I will probably cut that and put it out separately just so folks who don't catch the streams can kind of catch that, because I think it's important. And then we went through these locations. Thanks to Brian Smith and Dungeon Master Masterclass for sharing. Sorry that I didn't get my act together to write it down, but I did try to share it. And sorry again that my location's a little bit different. Maybe I'm breaking my own rule, but I think that's okay. And then finally, if you're in the U.S. And you get to enjoy Memorial Day, have a great Memorial Day. If you're outside the U.S., just have a great weekend, long weekend. Have a great any day. Have a great anytime, any day, anywhere you are. If you could give a thumbs up on your way out, that would be awesome. If you found yourself in here and you're not subscribed to the channel and you feel like subscribing, that would also be awesome. Other than that, everybody, have a great weekend or just a great rest of any of your days. Game on, and I will talk to you later. Bye, everybody.